The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos pushed the mop across the oil-stained concrete floor of Hangar 7 at Fort Campbell. It was 05:30 hours, and the Kentucky dawn was just beginning to creep through the massive hangar doors. The smell of aviation fuel and hydraulic fluid filled her nostrils, a scent that had become as familiar as her own perfume. But today, something felt different. Today, as she methodically cleaned around the towering Apache helicopters, she carried a secret in her breast pocket that could change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria had been assigned to maintenance duties for 3 months now, ever since the incident that had grounded her from flight status. 3 months of watching other pilots climb into the cockpits of the AH-64 Apache helicopters she knew better than anyone. 3 months of biting her tongue when newer pilots asked basic questions about aircraft systems she could troubleshoot in her sleep. 3 months of pretending that mopping floors and organizing tool cribs was somehow fulfilling for someone who had spent the last 8 years as one of the Army's most decorated Apache pilots. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, cleaning the very aircraft she had once commanded with precision and authority. The AH-64D Apache longbow helicopters sat like sleeping giants in the hangar, their stub wings loaded with Hellfire missiles and their 30mm chain guns pointed downward in their resting position. Each aircraft represented millions of dollars of the most advanced military technology on Earth, and Maria knew every bolt, every circuit, every system better than most of the mechanics who worked on them daily. But knowledge and capability meant nothing when you were fighting a battle that had nothing to do with enemy combatants or mechanical failures. Maria's war was being fought in conference rooms and administrative offices against an enemy more insidious than any foreign threat: institutional bias and a system that seemed designed to protect the wrong people while punishing those who dared to speak truth to power. As she worked, Maria's mind wandered back to Afghanistan, to the dusty forward operating bases where she had earned her reputation as Ghost 6, a call sign that struck fear into the hearts of Taliban fighters across Helmand Province. She remembered the weight of the collective in her hands, the vibration of the twin General Electric T700 turboshaft engines beneath her, the absolute clarity that came with being 2,000 feet above a battlefield with a clear mission and the tools to accomplish it. The Apache had been her home for nearly a decade. She knew the aircraft's capabilities intimately. Its maximum speed of 182 miles per hour, its service ceiling of 21,000 feet, and its range of 300 miles. More importantly, she understood its soul. She could feel when something was off in the collective pitch, or when the tail rotor needed adjustment, just by the subtle changes in vibration through the airframe. Flying an Apache wasn't just about technical proficiency, it was about becoming one with $30 million of precision engineering and turning it into an extension of your own will. Maria paused in her mopping to look up at Apache 910045, the aircraft she had flown for most of her last deployment. She could see a small dent in the nose section where shrapnel from an IED had struck during a close air support mission outside Marja. She had absorbed that hit while providing cover for an infantry unit that was pinned down, staying on station despite the damage until every soldier was safely extracted. The citation for her Distinguished Flying Cross was tucked away in a box at home, collecting dust while she pushed a mop across hangar floors. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hangar, and Maria instinctively straightened, focusing her attention back on her current reality. Major Richardson, the unit's executive officer, walked purposefully across the hangar floor, his boots clicking against the polished concrete floor. He was followed by 2 men in civilian clothes, contractors by their appearance, carrying clipboards and wearing the kind of serious expressions that usually meant trouble for someone. "Santos," Major Richardson called out, his voice carrying the particular tone officers used when they wanted to establish authority without actually saying anything meaningful. "Almost finished with this section, sir," Maria replied, keeping her voice neutral and professional. She had learned over the past 3 months that the key to surviving her current assignment was to become invisible, to perform her duties without drawing attention or giving anyone reason to find fault with her performance. Richardson nodded absently, his attention already shifting to the contractors, who were examining the Apache helicopters with the kind of clinical detachment that suggested they were evaluating equipment rather than marveling at some of the most sophisticated aircraft ever built. Maria continued her work, but her ears remained tuned to their conversation. "The maintenance records show these birds have been well cared for," one of the contractors was saying, consulting his clipboard. "Average flight hours are within acceptable parameters, and the recent depot-level maintenance appears to have been thorough." "That's what we like to hear," Richardson replied. "Our maintenance staff takes pride in keeping these aircraft mission-ready." Maria almost snorted at that comment. Richardson had no idea what it took to keep an Apache mission-ready. He was a logistics officer who had spent most of his career behind a desk, managing supply chains and personnel assignments. His understanding of aviation maintenance was limited to reading reports and signing paperwork. The contractors moved closer to Maria's position, their conversation continuing as they examined various components of the nearest Apache. She tried to focus on her work, but fragments of their discussion kept filtering through her consciousness. "The Army is looking at divesting some of these older D-model variants. The new AME Guardians have significantly enhanced capabilities, particularly in the areas of communications and targeting systems." "What's the timeline on that?" Richardson asked. "Preliminary assessments suggest a phased drawdown beginning next fiscal year. Units with lower readiness ratings or limited operational requirements will likely be the first to transition." Maria's grip tightened on the mop handle. She knew exactly what that meant. Units that had been deemed problematic or underperforming would be the first to lose their aircraft. Units like this one, where unconventional questions had been raised and uncomfortable truths had been spoken. The conversation between Richardson and the contractors faded as they moved deeper into the hangar, but Maria's mind was now racing. She had heard rumors about the drawdown, whispered conversations in the NCO club, and fragments of overheard phone calls in administrative offices. But hearing it discussed so casually, as if the aircraft she had devoted her life to mastering were just line items on a budget spreadsheet, brought the reality crashing home. Maria resumed her methodical mopping, but her thoughts were far from the mundane task at hand. She found herself remembering the day she had first climbed into an Apache cockpit as a young warrant officer fresh out of flight school. The complexity of the systems had been overwhelming at first. The multifunction displays, the helmet-mounted display system, the integrated fire control radar. But gradually, through hundreds of hours of training and combat missions, all of those separate components had merged into a single, coherent extension of her own capabilities. The Apache was unlike any other military helicopter. Where other aircraft might forgive small errors or compensate for pilot limitations, the Apache demanded absolute precision and complete understanding from its crew. It was an unforgiving machine that required constant attention and respect. But for those who earned its trust, it became the most capable and deadly helicopter ever created. Maria's specialization had been close air support, the dangerous and demanding mission of providing fire support to ground troops in contact with enemy forces. It required split-second decision-making, the ability to distinguish between friend and foe in chaotic battlefield conditions, and the skill to deliver precise firepower without endangering friendly forces. She had excelled at it, earning the respect of infantry commanders who knew they could count on Ghost 6 to be there when things went bad. Her reputation had been built mission by mission, over 3 combat deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. There was the time outside Kandahar when she had single-handedly held off a company-sized Taliban assault on a remote outpost, expending every round of 30mm ammunition and all 8 Hellfire missiles before ground reinforcements could arrive.
Or the night mission in Anbar province, when she had provided overwatch for a special operations raid, using her Apache's advanced night vision systems to guide ground forces through a complex urban environment while neutralizing multiple threats. But it wasn't just combat missions that had defined her career. Maria had also served as an instructor pilot, sharing her knowledge and experience with newer aviators. She had written training manuals, developed new tactics and procedures, and served on safety boards investigating Apache accidents. Her contributions to Apache aviation went far beyond simply flying missions. She had helped shape how the Army trained and employed its most valuable aviation asset. That expertise made her current situation all the more frustrating. Every day, she watched pilots and crew chiefs struggle with problems she could solve in minutes. She saw maintenance procedures being performed inefficiently, training scenarios being conducted without proper attention to safety protocols, and aircraft being operated below their optimal performance levels. But her input was no longer welcome, her experience no longer valued. The reason for her fall from grace was complicated, involving a web of personal relationships, professional conflicts, and institutional politics that had nothing to do with her capabilities as a pilot. It had started with her refusal to remain silent about safety violations she had witnessed during a training exercise. An ambitious captain had been cutting corners on maintenance procedures and pre-flight inspections, prioritizing schedule adherence over safety protocols. When Maria had raised her concerns through proper channels, she had been told to be a team player and work within the system. But the system was designed to protect officers like Captain Davis, who came from a military family with connections throughout the Army hierarchy. When Maria's concerns were dismissed, she had made the difficult decision to document the safety violations and report them to the Inspector General's office. Her report was thorough and professional, backed by photographs, maintenance records, and witness statements from other enlisted personnel who had been afraid to speak up themselves. The investigation that followed had vindicated Maria's concerns, finding multiple safety violations and procedural failures under Captain Davis's leadership. But rather than being thanked for preventing a potential accident, Maria found herself facing retaliation from the command structure that had been embarrassed by the investigation. Her flight status was revoked, pending a comprehensive review of her attitude and suitability for continued service in aviation. That review had been ongoing for 3 months now, during which time Maria had been assigned to increasingly menial duties while her case languished in bureaucratic limbo. She had been told that her confrontational approach and failure to work through appropriate channels had raised questions about her ability to function effectively as a part of a team. The irony was palpable. She was being punished for exactly the kind of attention to safety and adherence to regulations that the Army claimed to value. As Maria worked her way around the hangar, she reflected on the cost of speaking truth to power in a military system that often rewarded conformity over competence. She had known the risks when she filed her Inspector General complaint, but she had also known that remaining silent could result in the death of aircrew members who trusted their lives to properly maintained aircraft and competent leadership. The decision had been made easier by her memory of Chief Warrant Officer Michael Torres, an Apache pilot who had been killed 2 years earlier when his aircraft experienced a catastrophic engine failure during a training mission. The subsequent investigation had revealed that proper maintenance procedures had not been followed and that multiple warning signs had been ignored by the maintenance chain of command. Torres had left behind a wife and 2 young children, casualties of a system that sometimes prioritized expediency over safety. Maria had attended Torres's funeral, had seen his widow's tears and his children's confusion, and listened to the hollow words about sacrifice and service that couldn't bring back a husband and father whose death might have been prevented by stricter adherence to established procedures. That memory had sustained her through the difficult decision to report Captain Davis, and it continues to sustain her through the professional exile that had followed. But sustenance was different from satisfaction, and Maria found herself struggling with doubts about her future in the Army. At 32 years old, she was approaching the peak of her career potential. Under normal circumstances, she would be competing for selection to advanced courses, taking on increased leadership responsibilities, and positioning herself for promotion to senior warrant officer ranks. Instead, she was mopping floors and wondering if her decade of service and expertise meant anything to an institution that seemed more interested in protecting its image than in maintaining its standards. The sound of rotors in the distance drew Maria's attention back to the present. Through the open hangar doors, she could see an Apache approaching for landing, its distinctive silhouette unmistakable against the morning sky. The aircraft settled onto the tarmac with the practiced ease of an experienced crew. And Maria found herself automatically analyzing the approach and landing, noting the smooth collective inputs and precise positioning that marked skilled aviators. As the rotors wound down and the engine spooled off, Maria recognized the aircraft tail number, 040543, one of the newer Apache longbow variants assigned to the unit. The pilot and co-pilot gunner began their post-flight procedures, their movements visible through the cockpit's armored glass as they worked through their checklists with the methodical precision that Maria remembered from her own flying days.
Chief Warrant Officer Jake Mitchell climbed down from the pilot's seat, pulling off his helmet and running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. Maria knew Jake well. They had flown together on numerous occasions, and he was one of the few people in the unit who treated her with the same respect now that she was assigned to maintenance duties. He spotted her across the hangar and walked over, his expression troubled. "Hey, Ghost," he said, using her old call sign. "How's the glamorous world of hangar maintenance treating you?" "Living the dream," Maria replied with a wry smile. "How was the flight?" "Routine training mission, but we had some interesting radio chatter on the way back," Jake said, glancing around to make sure they weren't overheard. "Word is that there's going to be a big announcement this afternoon, something about unit restructuring and personnel reassignments." Maria felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. "Any specifics?" "Nothing concrete, but the rumor mill is suggesting that several senior enlisted personnel are going to be transferred out. The timing seems suspicious, especially with your case still pending." The implication was clear. Rather than resolving Maria's status through the formal review process, the unit leadership was apparently planning to simply transfer her somewhere else, making her someone else's problem while avoiding any admission of wrongdoing on their part. It was a time-honored military tradition. When faced with an uncomfortable situation, shuffle the personnel involved to different units and hope the problem fades away. Jake studied Maria's expression, reading the frustration and resignation in her eyes. "You know this isn't right," he said quietly. "You're one of the best Apache pilots I've ever flown with. The Army needs people like you, especially now with all the changes coming down the pipeline." "The Army needs people who follow orders and don't ask uncomfortable questions," Maria replied. "People like me are a liability in the current environment." "That's bullshit, and you know it," Jake said with uncharacteristic vehemence. "Safety isn't negotiable, and what you did probably saved lives. If more people had your courage, we'd have fewer accidents and fewer funerals." Before Maria could respond, Jake's radio crackled with a call from the operations center. "Viper 27, report to operations immediately for urgent mission briefing." Jake cursed under his breath. "Emergency call-up," he explained to Maria. "Probably a real-world mission." He started to turn away, then paused. "Look, whatever happens this afternoon, don't let them convince you that you're the problem. The problem is a system that punishes people for doing the right thing." As Jake hurried toward the operations building, Maria was left alone with her thoughts and her mop bucket. The hangar suddenly felt larger and more empty, the Apache helicopters looming over her like silent judges of her current circumstances. She had spent her entire adult life in service to these machines and the missions they represented, and now she was being pushed aside by people who valued political convenience over professional competence. She reached into her breast pocket and felt the small metal object that she had been carrying for the past week. Her Apache pilot wings, the symbol of her qualification and expertise, had been removed from her uniform when her flight status was revoked. Officially, she was no longer authorized to wear them, but she couldn't bring herself to put them away in a drawer or a box, so she carried them with her as a reminder of who she really was beneath the maintenance coveralls and the menial assignments. The wings were made of oxidized silver with the distinctive Apache helicopter silhouette in the center, surrounded by the traditional pilot wings design. Below the helicopter was a banner with the inscription, "Apache Pilot,"
and the entire badge was pinned to a small piece of ribbon in Army aviation colors. It was a simple piece of metal and fabric, but it represented years of training, thousands of flight hours, and a level of expertise that couldn't be taken away by administrative actions or bureaucratic maneuvering. As Maria continued her work, she found herself thinking about the other female Apache pilots she had known throughout her career. There weren't many. The Apache community was still predominantly male despite decades of integration efforts. Each woman who earned her place in that exclusive community faced additional challenges and scrutiny that their male counterparts rarely experienced. They had to be not just good, but exceptional, just to be accepted as equals. Maria had been fortunate in many ways. She had entered the Apache community at a time when attitudes were slowly changing, and she had been mentored by senior aviators who judged her on her performance rather than her gender. But she had also witnessed the subtle and not-so-subtle ways that women were sometimes marginalized or excluded from the informal networks that were crucial for career advancement. The irony of her current situation was that her commitment to safety and professional standards, qualities that should have been valued regardless of gender, had been reframed as personality defects. Her confrontational approach and failure to work within the system were criticisms that would likely never have been leveled against a male warrant officer with her experience and track record. But gender was only part of the equation. The institutional culture often struggled with individuals who challenged established hierarchies or questioned accepted practices. Whistleblowers and safety advocates were frequently viewed as troublemakers, regardless of the validity of their concerns. The system was designed to maintain order and cohesion, sometimes at the expense of accountability and improvement. As the morning wore on, Maria noticed increased activity around the operations center. Staff cars arrived and departed with unusual frequency, and she could see officers hurrying between buildings with the kind of purposeful urgency that suggested significant developments. Her suspicion that something major was about to be announced seemed to be confirmed by the heightened activity level. Around 1100 hours, the hangar's public address system crackled to life with an announcement that all personnel were to report to the unit briefing room at 1300 hours for an important command announcement. Maria felt her heart rate increase as she considered the possibilities. Whatever was about to be announced, she had a strong suspicion that it would significantly impact her future with the unit. She finished cleaning the section of hangar floor that she had been working on and began gathering her equipment. As she bent down to retrieve a cleaning rag that had fallen under one of the Apache's landing gear, her breast pocket caught on a protruding bolt. The fabric tore slightly, and Maria felt something small and metallic fall to the concrete floor with a distinctive metallic ping. Her Apache pilot wings had fallen from her pocket and now lay on the oil-stained hangar floor, the oxidized silver catching the fluorescent light from overhead. For a moment, Maria stared at the wings in dismay, seeing in their fall a metaphor for her own precipitous decline from respected aviator to hangar cleaner. The wings that had once been proudly displayed on her flight suit were now scattered on a dirty floor, separated from their ribbon and looking somehow smaller and more fragile than she remembered. As she knelt to retrieve the wings, she heard footsteps approaching from behind. She looked up to see Master Sergeant Patricia Williams, the unit's senior enlisted advisor and one of the few people in the command structure who had shown Maria any support during her recent difficulties. "Those don't belong on the floor," she said quietly, her voice carrying a mixture of sympathy and something else that Maria couldn't quite identify. "They don't belong on my uniform either, apparently," Maria replied, carefully picking up the wings and examining them for damage. Williams glanced around the hangar to ensure they weren't being overheard, then stepped closer to Maria. "What if I told you that might be about to change?" Maria looked up at Master Sergeant Williams with a mixture of hope and skepticism. Over the past 3 months, she had learned to guard against false optimism and empty promises. Too many people had expressed sympathy for her situation while doing nothing to actually help resolve it. "Sergeant Major, with all due respect, I've heard a lot of what-ifs lately that haven't materialized into anything concrete," Maria said, carefully tucking her Apache wings back into her torn pocket. Williams smiled grimly, understanding Maria's wariness. This is different, Santos. I've been working some back channels, and there have been some developments that you need to know about. But first, I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer. Maria stood up, brushing the dust from her knees. Go ahead. If you had the opportunity to return to flight status tomorrow, would you take it? Even knowing that it might mean leaving this unit, this post, and starting over somewhere else? The question caught Maria off guard. She had spent so much mental energy focused on fighting to clear her name and restore her reputation within her current unit that she hadn't seriously considered the possibility of a fresh start elsewhere. The idea was both appealing and terrifying. She paused, collecting her thoughts. Sergeant Major, flying Apaches isn't just what I do, it's who I am. If there's a legitimate opportunity to get back in the cockpit and serve where I'm needed, then yes, I'd take it in a heartbeat. But I won't compromise my principles or pretend that what happened here was acceptable just to get my wings back. Williams smiled approvingly. That's what I was hoping you'd say, because, as it turns out, your principled stand may have opened a door that wouldn't have been available otherwise. She glanced around the hangar once more, then gestured for Maria to follow her to a more private corner where their conversation couldn't be overheard. When they were settled behind the bulk of an Apache's engine compartment, Williams continued her explanation. 3 weeks ago, I received a call from Colonel Sarah Mitchell at the Pentagon. She's the branch chief for Apache operations in the Office of the Chief of Staff. Apparently, your Inspector General's report didn't just result in a local investigation. It got flagged as part of a broader pattern of safety and leadership issues that the Army is taking very seriously at the highest levels. Maria felt a surge of vindication mixed with apprehension. What kind of pattern? The details are classified above my level, but the general picture is that your situation isn't isolated. There have been similar cases across multiple installations involving safety advocates who were retaliated against for reporting problems through proper channels. The Army's senior leadership is concerned that the culture of retaliation is undermining safety and readiness across aviation units. Williams paused, allowing the implications to sink in before continuing. Colonel Sarah Mitchell has been tasked with identifying and rehabilitating aviators who are sidelined for what the Pentagon now recognizes as legitimate safety concerns. Your name is at the top of her list. Maria felt her heart racing. What does that mean, practically speaking? It means that there's a task force being formed to address systemic issues in Army aviation safety and leadership. They're looking for experienced aviators with uncompromising standards and the moral courage to speak up when they see problems. People who have proven they'll put safety and mission accomplishment ahead of their own career advancement. The description fit Maria perfectly, but she had learned to be cautious about opportunities that seemed too good to be true. And the catch is? Williams laughed. There's always a catch, isn't there? In this case, it would mean accepting a transfer to a joint task force position at Fort Rucker. You'd be working directly with senior officers from all service branches, developing new safety protocols and training standards. It's a career-enhancing position that could lead to significant opportunities for advancement. Maria considered the proposal carefully. Fort Rucker was the Army's primary aviation training center, home to the aviation branch and the location where she had earned her wings nearly a decade earlier. Returning there in a position of responsibility and influence would represent a dramatic reversal of her recent fortunes. What about my current situation here? The pending review, the allegations about my attitude and teamwork? That would all be dropped as part of your acceptance of the new assignment. Clean slate, fresh start, and a chance to help ensure that other aviators don't face the same kind of retaliation you've experienced. The offer was almost too good to believe, but Maria could see the logic in it from the Army's perspective. Rather than admitting fault in her specific case, they were reframing her experience as valuable preparation for a broader reform effort. It was a face-saving solution that allowed everyone involved to move forward without lengthy investigations or uncomfortable admissions of wrongdoing. "When would this happen?" Maria asked. "The official announcement is scheduled for this afternoon's briefing. Your transfer orders would be effective immediately with a report date at Fort Rucker next Monday." Maria felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The opportunity represented everything she had been hoping for: a return to meaningful work, recognition of her expertise, and a chance to make a positive impact on Army aviation. But it also meant leaving behind the familiar, starting over in a new environment, and taking on responsibilities that would put her under increased scrutiny. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Sergeant Major, I appreciate you bringing this to me directly, but I have to ask, why are you going to bat for me? You've been supportive throughout this whole mess, but this goes beyond just looking out for your soldiers." Williams was quiet for a moment, her expression becoming more serious. 23 years ago, I was a young sergeant in a transportation unit. I reported a maintenance supervisor who was falsifying inspection records on vehicles that were about to deploy to Operation Desert Storm. I was told to mind my own business and focus on my own job. She paused, her eyes distant with memory. 3 weeks into the deployment, one of those vehicles broke down in a convoy, and 2 soldiers were killed in the resulting ambush. I've always wondered if those deaths couldn't have been prevented if I had pushed harder, if I had been willing to take the career risk that you took. The weight of Williams' confession hung in the air between them. Maria understood now why the Master Sergeant had been so supportive. She saw in Maria the courage that she felt she had lacked in her own moment of truth. "I can't change what happened in 1991, Williams continued, "but I can make sure that when soldiers like you do the right thing, they're supported instead of punished. This task force assignment isn't charity. It's recognition of your value to the Army and to the soldiers whose lives depend on the aircraft you help maintain and operate." Before Maria could respond, the hangar's public address system crackled to life again. "All personnel assigned to the 1st Battalion, 227th Aviation Regiment report to the unit briefing room immediately. All personnel report to the unit briefing room immediately." Williams checked her watch. That's earlier than scheduled. Something must have accelerated the timeline. She looked directly at Maria. "Are you ready to get your wings back?" Maria reached into her pocket and felt the metal wings that had fallen to the hangar floor just minutes earlier. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. Sometimes you had to fall before you could rise higher than before. "I'm ready, Sergeant Major. Let's go see what the future holds."
The unit briefing room was packed beyond capacity, with soldiers standing along the walls and crowding near the entrance. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation and uncertainty. Military personnel had learned to be wary of unexpected command briefings, which often brought news of deployments, reorganizations, or policy changes that would significantly impact their lives. Maria found herself squeezed into a corner near the back of the room, still wearing her maintenance coveralls and conscious of the contrast between her current appearance and the pressed uniforms of the aviators and staff officers around her. But Master Sergeant Williams had positioned herself nearby, and her confident demeanor helped calm Maria's nerves about what was about to unfold. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison, the battalion commander, entered the room accompanied by several officers that Maria didn't recognize. One was a distinguished-looking woman wearing the eagles of a full colonel and the distinctive flight wings of a senior aviator. Based on Williams' earlier description, Maria suspected this was Colonel Sarah Mitchell from the Pentagon. "Ladies and gentlemen, take your seats if you can find them," Harrison announced, his voice carrying easily through the crowded room. "We have some significant announcements to make, and I want to ensure everyone understands the changes that are coming to our organization."
Harrison gestured to the woman beside him. First, I'd like to introduce Colonel Sarah Mitchell from the Department of the Army Headquarters. Colonel Mitchell is the branch chief for Apache operations and is here to discuss some Army-wide initiatives that will impact our unit directly. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward, her presence commanding immediate attention from everyone in the room. She was clearly comfortable addressing large groups and radiated the kind of confidence that came from years of leadership experience in challenging environments. Thank you, Colonel Harrison. I'm here today to discuss the Army's new Aviation Safety and Leadership Excellence Initiative, a comprehensive program designed to address systemic issues that have been identified across our aviation community. Maria felt her pulse quicken as Mitchell continued her presentation. Over the past 18 months, the Army has conducted extensive reviews of safety reporting, leadership effectiveness, and unit culture within our aviation branches. What we've discovered is troubling, but not surprising to those who have been paying attention. We have identified patterns of retaliation against personnel who report safety violations, inadequate support for junior leaders who challenge problematic practices, and a culture that sometimes prioritizes short-term metrics over long-term safety and effectiveness. A murmur ran through the crowded briefing room as soldiers absorbed the implications of Mitchell's words. Many had experienced or witnessed exactly the kind of problems she was describing, but few had expected to hear them acknowledged so directly by senior leadership. The Aviation Safety and Leadership Excellence Initiative represents a fundamental shift in how the Army approaches these issues. Rather than treating safety reporting as a necessary evil or viewing challenging subordinates as problem children, we are going to actively seek out and reward the kind of moral courage and professional competence that makes our aviation community truly excellent. Mitchell paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. As part of this initiative, we are establishing joint task forces at key installations across the Army. These task forces will be staffed by carefully selected personnel who have demonstrated both technical expertise and the moral courage to speak up when they identify problems. Maria glanced around the room and noticed that several people were looking in her direction. Clearly, word of her situation had spread beyond the immediate chain of command, and people were beginning to connect the dots between Mitchell's presentation and recent events within the unit. Fort Rucker will host the primary task force for this initiative, focusing on Apache operations and maintenance. The task force will be responsible for developing new training protocols, updating safety reporting procedures, and creating leadership development programs that emphasize ethical decision-making and mission accomplishment over political considerations. Mitchell's eyes swept across the room, and I could swear they lingered on her position near the back wall. We are looking for volunteers for this task force, but we are particularly interested in personnel who have demonstrated exceptional technical competence and unwavering commitment to safety standards, even when that commitment came at personal cost. The room was completely silent now, with everyone focused intently on Mitchell's words. The implications were becoming clear. This wasn't just a policy announcement, but a potential career opportunity for those who had been marginalized for standing up for their principles. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, would you please step forward? The request hit Maria like a physical blow. Every head in the room turned to look at her, and she felt her face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and anticipation. Williams gave her an encouraging nod, and Maria began making her way through the crowded room toward the front. As she walked, Maria was acutely aware of her maintenance coveralls and the contrast they presented to the crisp uniforms of the aviators and staff officers around her. But she held her head high, drawing on the same inner strength that had sustained her through months of professional exile. Staff Sergeant Santos, Mitchell continued as Maria reached the front of the room. Your recent actions in reporting safety violations through proper channels demonstrate exactly the kind of moral courage and professional competence that this initiative is designed to support and reward. Mitchell turned to address the entire room while keeping Maria beside her at the front. 3 months ago, Staff Sergeant Santos identified serious safety violations within this unit and reported them through appropriate channels. Rather than being thanked for her vigilance, she faced retaliation that resulted in her removal from flight status and assignment to menial duties. The colonel's voice hardened slightly. This kind of retaliation is unacceptable and counterproductive to our mission of maintaining the world's most capable aviation force. Staff Sergeant Santos did exactly what we train our soldiers to do. She identified a problem, documented it thoroughly, and reported it through proper channels. The fact that she was punished rather than rewarded represents a failure of leadership that we are committed to addressing. Maria stood at attention, overwhelmed by the public vindication of her actions, but also acutely aware that this moment was being witnessed by many of the same people who had ostracized her over the past 3 months. Effective immediately, Staff Sergeant Santos is being reassigned to the Aviation Safety and Leadership Excellence Task Force at Fort Rucker. She will serve as the Senior Enlisted Advisor for Apache Operations with responsibility for developing new safety protocols and training standards that will be implemented Army-wide. Mitchell turned back to Maria with a slight smile. Staff Sergeant, your flight status is hereby restored, and you are authorized to resume wearing your Apache pilot wings immediately. Your experience over the past 3 months, while professionally challenging, has provided you with unique insights into the problems we're trying to solve. That experience, combined with your technical expertise and demonstrated integrity, makes you ideally suited for this assignment. Maria felt tears welling up in her eyes as the full impact of Mitchell's words hit her. After months of doubt and uncertainty, after beginning to question whether her principles and her career were compatible, she was being offered not just vindication, but an opportunity to help ensure that other soldiers wouldn't face the same kind of retaliation she had experienced. "Thank you, ma'am," Maria managed, her voice slightly hoarse with emotion. "I'm honored to accept the assignment." Mitchell nodded approvingly, then addressed the room once more. "Let me be absolutely clear about the message we're sending today. The Army values soldiers who have the courage to speak up when they see problems. We value technical competence over political compliance, and we will not tolerate retaliation against personnel who report safety violations or other problems through proper channels." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled soldiers. "I encourage all of you to learn from Staff Sergeant Santos's example. When you see something that compromises safety or mission effectiveness, speak up, document it properly, and report it through appropriate channels. And if you face retaliation for doing the right thing, know that the Army's senior leadership is committed to supporting you." Mitchell concluded her remarks and stepped back, allowing Lieutenant Colonel Harrison to resume control of the briefing. But the damage, or rather the healing, had already been done. Maria stood at the front of the room, no longer the ostracized troublemaker, but now a symbol of the Army's commitment to doing better. Harrison cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the implicit criticism of his unit's handling of Maria's situation. "Colonel Mitchell, we appreciate your visit and the opportunity to participate in this important initiative. Staff Sergeant Santos, congratulations on your new assignment. We'll process your transfer orders immediately." As the briefing concluded and soldiers began filing out of the room, Maria found herself surrounded by colleagues who offered congratulations and support. Some were people who had been quietly sympathetic all along, but hadn't felt able to speak up publicly. Others were individuals who were apparently reassessing their previous judgments about her situation. Chief Warrant Officer Jake Mitchell was among the first to reach her. "Ghost, this is incredible news. You deserve every bit of this recognition and more." "Thanks, Jake. It still feels surreal. This morning I was mopping hangar floors, and now I'm supposedly going to help reshape Army aviation safety policy." "Not supposedly, Maria," interrupted Master Sergeant Williams, who had made her way through the crowd. "Definitely. And you're going to excel at it, just like you've excelled at everything else you've put your mind to." Maria reached into her pocket and pulled out her Apache pilot wings, which she had been carrying like a talisman through her months of professional exile. For the first time in 3 months, she had the right to pin them back on her uniform. "Would you do the honors, Sergeant Major?" she asked Williams. Williams smiled broadly and took the wings from Maria's hand. "It would be my privilege." As Williams pinned the wings to Maria's coveralls, a temporary measure until she could change into a proper uniform, Maria felt a sense of completion and new beginnings simultaneously. The wings looked incongruous against the maintenance coveralls, but they felt right in a way that nothing had for months.
The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of administrative activity and emotional conversations. Maria had to process her transfer orders, pack her personal belongings, and prepare for her departure to Fort Rucker the following Monday. But perhaps more importantly, she had to process the dramatic reversal of her professional fortunes and what it meant for her future. Colonel Mitchell had remained at Fort Campbell for several hours after the briefing, conducting private meetings with various personnel and observing unit operations. Before her departure, she had requested a one-on-one conversation with Maria to discuss the specifics of her new assignment and the expectations for her performance. They met in the unit conference room, the same space where Maria had endured countless uncomfortable meetings over the past 3 months. But now the dynamic was completely different, with Mitchell treating her as a valued colleague rather than a problem to be managed. "Staff Sergeant, I want to be completely transparent with you about what you're walking into at Fort Rucker," Mitchell began. "This task force assignment isn't going to be easy. You'll be working with senior officers from all service branches, many of whom may be skeptical about taking direction from an enlisted soldier, regardless of your expertise." Maria nodded. "I understand, ma'am. I've never been intimidated by rank when safety and mission accomplishment were at stake." "That's exactly the attitude we need, but it's also why I want to prepare you for some of the challenges ahead. You'll be developing policies and procedures that could significantly impact how the Army conducts aviation operations. There will be resistance from some quarters, particularly from people who are comfortable with the current system." Mitchell leaned back in her chair, her expression becoming more serious. "You'll also be working closely with contractors from major defense firms, government civilians from multiple agencies, and international partners from allied nations. Your technical expertise will be respected, but you'll need to learn to navigate complex bureaucratic and political environments." "Ma'am, if I may ask, why me? I mean, I appreciate the opportunity, but there must be other Apache pilots with my level of experience who haven't been involved in controversial situations." Mitchell smiled. "That's exactly why it has to be you. We need people who have demonstrated they'll do the right thing even when it costs them personally. We need people who understand firsthand how the current system fails and why it needs to change. Most importantly, we need people who have the moral authority that comes from having paid a price for their principles." She paused, studying Maria's expression. The easy choice would have been to select someone with an unblemished record who's never faced serious challenges. But we're not trying to make easy changes. We're trying to fundamentally alter a culture that has tolerated safety shortcuts and leadership failures for too long. Maria felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. The assignment wasn't just a career opportunity. It was a chance to help prevent other soldiers from experiencing the kind of retaliation she had faced, and more importantly, to prevent accidents that could cost lives. "What about my replacement here? I'm concerned about the maintenance standards and training protocols that were already problematic before my situation became a distraction." "That's been addressed. A senior warrant officer from the Aviation Technical Test Center is being assigned as the new maintenance test pilot. He has specific instructions to conduct a comprehensive review of all procedures and to report directly to me with his findings." The news was reassuring. Maria had been worried that her departure might leave a vacuum in technical oversight that could lead to the same problems that had started this whole ordeal. "There's one more thing I need to discuss with you. Your new position will require a security clearance upgrade and access to classified information that goes beyond what you've had in conventional line units. The background investigation will be thorough, and investigators will likely contact people from throughout your career." Maria felt a moment of concern, then realized she had nothing to hide. Her record was clean, her financial situation was stable, and her personal relationships had always been appropriate. If anything, the investigation would likely reinforce the positive assessment of her character and integrity. "I don't anticipate any problems with the security clearance, ma'am." "I didn't think you would, but I wanted you to know what to expect. The process usually takes several months, but we're expediting yours given the priority of this assignment." She stood up, signaling the end of their formal discussion.
Staff Sergeant, I want you to know that what you've been through here wasn't wasted. Your experience gives you credibility and insights that will be invaluable in your new role. You've proven that you can maintain your standards and integrity even under intense pressure, and that's exactly the kind of leadership we need. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Mitchell offered one final thought. 20 years from now, when Apache pilots are operating under improved safety protocols and leadership standards, they'll have you to thank for it. That might not seem real right now, but I want you to remember that during the difficult days ahead. After Mitchell's departure, Maria spent the rest of the afternoon completing administrative tasks and saying goodbye to the colleagues who had supported her through her ordeal. The hangar where she had spent so many hours mopping floors now seemed like a different place, transformed by the knowledge that her exile was ending and her expertise was being recognized. Chief Warrant Officer Jake Mitchell found her there as the duty day was winding down, cleaning out her small locker in the maintenance office. So this is really happening. Ghost 6 is getting her wings back and heading off to bigger things? It still doesn't feel real, Maria admitted. This morning I was wondering if my career was over, and now I'm supposedly going to help reshape Army aviation policy. Jake sat down on a nearby bench, his expression thoughtful. You know what the really remarkable thing is? You never stopped being the same person. When they took away your flight status and assigned you to maintenance duties, you could have gotten bitter or started going through the motions. Instead, you kept the same standards and work ethic that made you a great pilot. Maria paused in her packing, considering Jake's observation. I don't think I knew how to be anyone else. Even when I was mopping floors, I was still thinking like a pilot. I was still watching the maintenance procedures and noticing when things weren't being done properly. That's exactly my point. Your identity isn't tied to your assignment or your uniform. It's tied to your character and your commitment to excellence. That's why this new assignment makes perfect sense. They need someone who can't be compromised or discouraged from doing the right thing. As the sun set over Fort Campbell, Maria finished packing her belongings and took one last look around the hangar that had been her workplace for the past 3 months. The Apache helicopters sat in their maintenance positions, ready for the next day's operations. Tomorrow, other pilots would climb into those cockpits and take off on training missions or real-world operations, trusting their lives to the aircraft and the maintenance personnel who kept them flying. Soon, Maria would be in a position to help ensure that trust was never misplaced. Her experience over the past 3 months, painful as it had given her insights into the systemic problems that could compromise safety and effectiveness. Now she had the opportunity and the responsibility to help address those problems at the highest levels. The drive from Fort Campbell to Fort Rucker took Maria through the heart of the American South, past cotton fields and small towns that seemed unchanged since the 1950s. But as she crossed the Alabama state line, she felt like she was traveling not just through geography, but through time, back to the place where her career as an Apache pilot had begun, and forward into an uncertain future where she would help shape the next generation of Army aviators. Fort Rucker looked exactly as she remembered it from her initial flight training nearly a decade earlier. The sprawling installation was home to the U.S. Army Aviation Center of Excellence, and the skyline was dominated by control towers and the distinctive silhouettes of various military helicopters. UH-60 Blackhawks, OH-58 Kiowas, and AH-64 Apaches shared the airspace with civilian contractors and foreign military students who came to Rucker to learn American aviation techniques. Maria's new assignment was housed in Building 5906, a modern facility that served as headquarters for the Aviation Safety and Leadership Excellence Task Force. Unlike the traditional military architecture she was accustomed to, this building had been designed with collaboration in mind, featuring open floor plans, conference rooms with glass walls, and high-tech presentation facilities that could accommodate video conferences with personnel around the world. She arrived on Monday morning precisely at 0800 hours, wearing a crisp ACU uniform with her newly restored Apache pilot wings prominently displayed. The weekend had given her time to adjust to the reality of her changed circumstances, but she still felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension as she prepared to meet her new colleagues and learn the specifics of her assignment. The task force director was Colonel Patricia Hayes, a former Apache pilot herself who had transitioned to staff assignments after a distinguished career in operational units. Hayes was in her mid-40s, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of leadership experience in challenging environments. Staff Sergeant Santos, welcome to Fort Rucker, Hayes said as she greeted Maria in the building's main lobby. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your reputation preceded you, and I mean that in the best possible way. Thank you, ma'am. I'm honored to be here and eager to get started. Hayes led Maria on a tour of the facility, introducing her to the various teams and explaining the organizational structure of the task force. The operation was more complex than Maria had anticipated, with representatives from all service branches, civilian contractors from major aerospace companies, and liaisons from allied militaries who came to Rucker to learn American aviation techniques. Your primary assignment will be with Team Alpha, Hayes explained as they walked through a corridor lined with briefing rooms. That's our Apache-focused group responsible for developing new training protocols and safety standards specifically for attack helicopter operations. You'll be working closely with Major Robert Chen, who's our team leader, and Dr. Sarah Williams, a civilian contractor from Boeing who specializes in human factors engineering. They stopped outside a conference room where Maria could see several people engaged in what appeared to be an intense discussion over technical documents and computer displays. Through the glass wall, she could see detailed schematics of Apache systems and what looked like accident investigation reports. The team is currently working on a comprehensive review of Apache accidents over the past 5 years, looking for patterns that might indicate systemic training or maintenance issues. Your practical experience will be invaluable in helping us understand not just what happened, but why it happened and how we can prevent similar incidents in the future. Hayes opened the conference room door and gestured for Maria to enter. The conversation inside paused as the team members looked up expectantly. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, our new senior enlisted advisor for Apache operations. Maria, let me introduce your new teammates. Major Chen stood up and extended his hand. He was a compact man in his early 30s, with the kind of intense focus that Maria associated with pilots who had seen significant combat experience. Staff Sergeant, I've read your file and I'm impressed. We need someone with your background and perspective on this team. Dr. Williams was next, a civilian woman in her 40s who radiated the kind of technical competence that came from years of working with complex aviation systems. I'm particularly interested in your insights into maintenance procedures and crew training. We've been analyzing data, but we need someone who understands how these systems actually function in operational environments. The third team member was Chief Warrant Officer 5, David Rodriguez, the most senior enlisted aviator Maria had ever met. Rodriguez was a legend in Apache circles, with over 8,000 flight hours and combat experience spanning 3 decades. His presence on the team was both intimidating and reassuring. Intimidating because of his reputation, but reassuring because it showed how seriously the Army was taking this initiative. Santos, Rodriguez said with a slight smile, I've been hearing about you for months. Word travels fast in the Apache community, and what you did at Campbell took guts. We're going to put that courage to good use here. Maria spent the rest of her first day being briefed on the team's current projects and reviewing the data they had compiled on Apache operations. The scope of their work was broader than Maria had anticipated, covering everything from basic flight training to advanced combat tactics, from maintenance procedures to crew resource management. On her final day in RAF Wattisham, she was invited to fly as an observer in a British Apache during a training exercise. The opportunity to return to the cockpit of an Apache, even as a passenger, was emotionally overwhelming. As the aircraft lifted off and climbed to altitude, Maria felt the familiar sensation of being part of a precision machine designed for the most demanding missions. The British crew conducted their training exercise with the same professionalism and attention to detail that Maria associated with the best American Apache units. But she also noticed subtle differences in procedures and communication protocols that reflected their emphasis on safety culture and continuous improvement. "Your insights have been invaluable during this visit," Squadron Leader Thompson said over the aircraft's intercom system. "We're implementing several of your recommendations about maintenance communication protocols in our own units." As they returned to base, Maria realized that the exchange had been beneficial in both directions. While she had learned about British approaches to safety reporting and leadership accountability, she had also contributed ideas and perspectives that would help improve their operations. During the post-flight debrief, Maria participated in the exact kind of structured discussion between aircrew and maintenance personnel that the British had described as crucial to their safety improvements. The pilot and co-pilot systematically reviewed every aspect of the flight, noting minor discrepancies and discussing potential maintenance implications with the ground crew. "This is exactly what we need to implement in American units," Maria told Thompson, as they observed the process. "The communication between aircrew and maintenance personnel is far more comprehensive than what I typically see at home." Thompson nodded in agreement. "It took time to develop this culture, but the results have been dramatic. Our maintenance-related incidents have decreased by 60% since we implemented these procedures 3 years ago." The statistics were compelling, and Maria spent her remaining time in Wadisham documenting the specific elements of the British approach that could be adapted for American operations. She interviewed maintenance supervisors, safety officers, and line pilots, gathering detailed information about implementation challenges and lessons learned. One conversation that particularly impressed her was with Chief Technician Margaret O'Brien, a senior maintenance supervisor who had been instrumental in developing the British safety reporting system. O'Brien had faced similar challenges to what Maria had experienced at Fort Campbell, including resistance from unit leadership and concerns about retaliation. The key was getting senior leadership to understand that safety reporting isn't about finding fault, it's about continuous improvement. Once commanders realized that units with robust safety reporting actually performed better operationally, the resistance diminished significantly. O'Brien went on to describe how the British had implemented anonymous reporting systems that protected personnel from retaliation while still allowing for thorough investigation and corrective action. The system had evolved over several years with constant refinement based on user feedback and operational experience. "We also discovered that recognition was crucial," O'Brien continued. "Personnel who identified safety issues weren't just protected from retaliation, they were actively recognized for their contributions to unit safety and mission effectiveness." Maria took extensive notes about the recognition programs, seeing immediate applications for American units. The idea of publicly celebrating personnel who identified and reported safety concerns was a powerful cultural statement that would help normalize and encourage such behavior. Her final evening in Britain was spent at a farewell dinner with the Apache Squadron personnel who had hosted her visit. The informal setting allowed for candid discussions about the challenges facing military aviators in both countries, and Maria was struck by the similarities in their experiences and concerns. "The fundamental issue," observed Major Catherine Walsh, a senior Apache pilot with extensive combat experience, "is that military organizations often struggle to balance operational demands with safety requirements. The pressure to maintain high operational tempo can create incentives to cut corners or ignore potential problems." "That's exactly what happened at my unit," Maria replied. "The maintenance supervisor was under tremendous pressure to keep aircraft available for training missions, and safety procedures were gradually compromised in favor of schedule adherence."
Squadron Leader Thompson, who had become both a professional colleague and a friend during Maria's visit, offered her final thoughts on the week's exchanges. "What you've accomplished, Maria, goes far beyond just reporting safety violations. You've helped demonstrate that individual moral courage can create systematic organizational change."
The comment resonated deeply with Maria, who had often wondered whether her personal sacrifice had been worthwhile. Seeing the British success in addressing similar problems gave her confidence that the American task force could achieve comparable results. The flight back to Alabama gave Maria time to process everything she had learned during her week in Britain. She had filled 2 notebooks with observations and recommendations, but more importantly, she had gained a new understanding of the global scope of the challenges facing military aviation and the potential for international collaboration to address them. Her experience also reinforced her conviction that the work of the Aviation Safety and Leadership Excellence Task Force was both necessary and achievable. The British had proven that military organizations could change their culture and improve their safety performance when leadership made it a priority and provided the necessary resources and authority. As the aircraft descended toward Atlanta, Maria found herself thinking about the soldiers and aviators who would benefit from the changes the task force was developing. Every improved procedure, every enhanced training protocol, every cultural reform that encouraged safety reporting had the potential to prevent accidents and save lives. She thought about Chief Warrant Officer Michael Torres, whose death in an Apache accident had helped motivate her decision to report safety violations at Fort Campbell. Torres would never know that his sacrifice had contributed to broader reforms that might prevent similar tragedies. But Maria was determined to ensure that his memory continued to inspire the changes that were needed. The British experience had shown her that transformation was possible, but it required sustained commitment from leadership at all levels. The technical solutions were relatively straightforward: improved procedures, better communication protocols, enhanced training programs. The real challenge lay in changing organizational culture and creating incentives that supported safety reporting and continuous improvement. Upon her return to Fort Rucker, Maria immediately began preparing a comprehensive report on her British exchange, highlighting specific recommendations that could be implemented in American units. The report would become a crucial component of the task force's final recommendations, providing concrete examples of successful safety culture transformation. But beyond the formal report, Maria's experience in Britain had given her something even more valuable: confidence that the changes they were working to implement could succeed. She had seen firsthand that military organizations could evolve and improve when the right leadership and systems were in place. The work was far from over. Maria's international exchanges would continue with visits to Australia and Germany, and the task force still had months of analysis and policy development ahead of them. But for the first time since her ordeal at Fort Campbell had begun, Maria felt confident that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing work that would have lasting impact on the aviation community she loved. As she settled back into her routine at Fort Rucker, Maria carried with her the knowledge that change was not only possible, but inevitable. The question was no longer whether American military aviation culture would evolve, but how quickly and effectively the transformation could be implemented. Her role in that process had expanded far beyond anything she could have imagined when her Apache pilot wings first fell to that hangar floor, but she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. A project that particularly caught her attention was a comprehensive analysis of what the team called normalization of deviance, the gradual acceptance of lower standards that occurred when safety shortcuts became routine. It was a phenomenon she had witnessed firsthand at Fort Campbell, and she realized that her recent experience made her uniquely qualified to identify and address these issues. "This is exactly what I was dealing with in my last unit," Maria told the team, as they reviewed a case study of an Apache accident that had been caused by inadequate maintenance procedures. The maintenance supervisor was cutting corners on inspections, and when I raised concerns, I was told that I was being too rigid and not understanding the operational tempo. Dr. Williams looked up from her computer screen with interest. Can you describe the specific procedures that were being compromised? I'm trying to understand how these shortcuts become institutionalized. Maria spent the next hour detailing the problems she had observed at Fort Campbell, explaining how time pressure and leadership indifference had gradually eroded safety standards. The team listened intently, asking detailed questions and taking extensive notes. "This is incredibly valuable," Major Chen said when Maria finished her briefing. "We have the accident data and the regulatory standards, but we need to understand the human factors that allow these problems to develop. Your experience gives us insights that we can't get from official reports." As the day progressed, Maria began to understand the true scope of the task force's mission. They weren't just developing new policies and procedures, they were trying to fundamentally change the culture of Army aviation. It was an ambitious goal that would require not just technical expertise, but also a deep understanding of organizational psychology and change management.
Maria's second week at Fort Rucker was dedicated to intensive briefings and data analysis that revealed the full scope of the problems the task force was trying to address. What she had experienced at Fort Campbell was not an isolated incident, but rather part of a pattern that extended across the entire Army aviation community. The conference room that had become Team Alpha's workspace was now covered with charts, graphs, and incident reports that painted a troubling picture of systemic issues. Apache Class A accidents, those involving fatalities or aircraft loss, had increased by 37% over the past 3 years. But here's the interesting part. When we break down the causes, we see that maintenance-related failures account for 42% of the increase. Chief Warrant Officer Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. That's consistent with what I've been seeing in operational units. Maintenance crews are under tremendous pressure to keep aircraft available for training and operations. When you're short-staffed and trying to maintain a high operational tempo, corners get cut. Maria studied the data, recognizing patterns that aligned with her own experience. The problem is that these shortcuts become normalized over time. What starts as an emergency exception becomes standard procedure and eventually becomes the new baseline for acceptable performance. Major Chen nodded in agreement. That's exactly what we're seeing. And when someone like you raises concerns about these degraded standards, they're viewed as the problem rather than the symptom of a larger issue. The team had been analyzing not just accident data, but also personnel actions, disciplinary reports, and career progression patterns for aviators who had raised safety concerns. The results were sobering. Soldiers who reported safety violations or challenged questionable practices were significantly more likely to face negative personnel actions, delayed promotions, and involuntary transfers. We've identified 47 cases over the past 3 years where aviators reported safety concerns through proper channels and subsequently faced retaliation. Of those 47 cases, only 12 resulted in corrective action being taken to address the safety issues. The other 35 were essentially ignored, while the reporting individuals were marginalized or transferred. Maria felt a chill as she realized how close she had come to becoming just another statistic in that dataset. Without Colonel Mitchell's intervention and the formation of this task force, her case would likely have been resolved through a quiet transfer and a notation in her personnel file about attitude problems that would have followed her for the rest of her career. What about the safety issues themselves? Were any of these cases followed by accidents that could have been prevented? Rodriguez consulted his notes before answering. We've identified at least 6 accidents over the past 2 years that occurred in units where safety concerns had been raised and ignored within the previous 12 months. 3 of those accidents resulted in fatalities. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't just talking about administrative failures or career setbacks. They were dealing with a system that had prioritized political considerations over human lives. This is why your experience is so valuable, Colonel Hayes said as she joined the team for their afternoon briefing. You understand firsthand how these systemic failures develop and what it takes to challenge them effectively. Hayes had been spending increasing amounts of time with Team Alpha as their findings became more significant. The data they were compiling would form the foundation for major policy changes that would need to be approved at the highest levels of the Army hierarchy. I want to talk about implementation strategies, Hayes continued. We can develop the best policies and procedures in the world, but if we don't have an effective way to implement them throughout the Army, we're just creating more paperwork that will be ignored at the unit level. Maria had been thinking about this exact problem. Ma'am, based on my experience, I think the key is accountability at the senior leadership level. The problems I saw at Fort Campbell existed because there were no meaningful consequences for leaders who allowed safety standards to deteriorate. She paused, organizing her thoughts before continuing. The current system creates perverse incentives. Unit commanders are rewarded for maintaining high operational tempo and avoiding incidents that draw unwanted attention, but they're not held accountable for the gradual erosion of safety standards as long as nothing catastrophic happens on their watch. Major Chen leaned forward with interest. What kind of accountability measures do you think would be effective? I think we need to change how we evaluate senior leaders. Instead of just looking at operational metrics and accident statistics, we need to assess whether they're maintaining a culture that encourages safety reporting and supports personnel who raise legitimate concerns. Dr. Williams was taking notes rapidly. That's an interesting approach. We could develop standardized assessment tools that measure safety culture rather than just safety outcomes. The conversation continued for another hour, with the team exploring various implementation strategies and discussing the political challenges they would face in trying to change entrenched cultural cultures. Maria found herself contributing insights based not just on her technical knowledge, but on her understanding of how military organizations actually functioned at the operational level. As the meeting concluded, Chief Rodriguez approached Maria privately. Santos, I want you to know that what you're doing here is going to have a real impact. I've been in Army aviation for 30 years, and I've seen too many good soldiers get crushed by a system that should have been supporting them. Thank you, Chief, but I have to ask, why didn't more senior people speak up about these problems? I mean no disrespect, but surely you and others with your experience level must have seen what was happening. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, considering his response carefully. The truth is that many of us did see the problems, but we thought we could address them through informal channels or by setting good examples in our own units. We underestimated how pervasive the cultural issues had become. He paused, his expression reflecting years of accumulated frustration. Senior enlisted leaders like me are supposed to be the bridge between the officer corps and the soldiers doing the actual work. But somewhere along the way, too many of us became more concerned about protecting our own positions than about protecting our soldiers. Your case was a wake-up call that we couldn't ignore anymore. Maria appreciated Rodriguez's honesty, and it helped her understand why her situation had resonated so strongly with Army senior leadership. She represented not just an individual case of injustice, but a symptom of broader failures that threatened the entire aviation community.
3 weeks into her assignment at Fort Rucker, Maria was introduced to an aspect of the task force's work that she hadn't anticipated: international collaboration. The Aviation Safety and Leadership Excellence Initiative wasn't just an American effort. It was part of a broader coalition of allied militaries working together to improve aviation safety and effectiveness. The revelation came during a video conference with representatives from the British Army Air Corps, the Australian Army Aviation, and the German Army Aviation Corps. Maria found herself sitting alongside Colonel Hayes and Major Chen, participating in a discussion about safety culture and reporting procedures with some of the world's most experienced military aviators. The patterns we're seeing in the United States are not unique, explained Colonel James Worthington from the British Army Air Corps. We've conducted similar analyses of our Apache operations, and we've identified comparable issues with safety reporting and leadership accountability.
The British had been operating Apache helicopters for nearly 2 decades, and their experience included extensive combat operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. But according to Colonel Worthington, they had also struggled with cultural issues that discouraged safety reporting and punished personnel who challenged established practices. "We implemented a confidential safety reporting system 5 years ago," Worthington continued, "and the results were initially encouraging. We saw a significant increase in reported safety concerns and near-miss incidents. However, we also discovered that the information wasn't being acted upon effectively at the unit level." Major Chen asked the obvious follow-up question, "What kind of systemic changes did you implement to address that problem?" "We established an independent safety review board with representatives from multiple units and ranks. The board has the authority to conduct investigations and mandate corrective actions regardless of unit command preferences." Maria listened intently as the international partners discussed their approaches to safety culture and leadership accountability. Each military had developed slightly different solutions, but the underlying problems were remarkably consistent across national boundaries and organizational structures. The German representative, Oberstleutnant Hans Müller, offered particularly interesting insights into their approach to maintenance procedures and technical training. "We discovered that our maintenance-related incidents were often caused by inadequate communication between aircrew and maintenance personnel. Pilots would notice minor discrepancies during flight operations, but these observations weren't being properly documented or transmitted to the maintenance teams." "How did you address that communication gap?" Maria asked, speaking up for the first time during the conference. "We implemented mandatory post-flight debriefings between aircrew and maintenance supervisors. Every flight, regardless of duration or complexity, concludes with a structured discussion about aircraft performance and any anomalies observed during the mission." The concept seemed simple, but Maria recognized its potential impact. At Fort Campbell, she had frequently observed situations where pilots noted minor issues during flight operations, but failed to properly document them in maintenance logs. Over time, these minor problems could develop into major safety hazards. "That's an excellent idea," she said. "We could adapt that approach for implementation across U.S. Army aviation units." Colonel Hayes smiled approvingly. "Staff Sergeant Santos brings a unique perspective to our discussions. Her recent experience with safety reporting and organizational retaliation gives her insights that are directly relevant to the challenges we're all facing." The video conference continued for another hour, with representatives from each country sharing specific case studies and implementation strategies. Maria found herself taking extensive notes and asking detailed questions about techniques that could be adapted for use in American units. After the conference concluded, Colonel Hayes asked Maria to remain for a private discussion about the international collaboration aspects of her assignment. "I want to expand your role to include more direct interaction with our international partners. Your technical expertise and practical experience make you an ideal liaison for sharing information and best practices." "Ma'am, I'm honored by the opportunity, but I have to ask, is this typical for an enlisted soldier's assignment? It seems like these international discussions usually involve more senior personnel." "Ha!" Hayes laughed. "Nothing about this task force is typical, Staff Sergeant. We're dealing with problems that can't be solved through traditional hierarchical approaches. The international partners specifically requested to work with personnel who have direct operational experience, regardless of rank." She paused, consulting her notes before continuing. "In fact, the British have invited you to visit their Apache training facilities next month to observe their safety reporting procedures firsthand. The Australians have extended a similar invitation for the following month." Maria felt a surge of excitement mixed with apprehension. International travel and collaboration opportunities were typically reserved for senior officers and civilian specialists. The fact that she was being included in these exchanges represented a dramatic expansion of her professional horizons. "What would be expected of me during these visits?" "You'd observe their operations, participate in training exercises, and document best practices that could be implemented in U.S. units. More importantly, you'd share your own experiences and insights with their personnel. Remember, what you've been through at Fort Campbell isn't just an American problem. Similar issues exist in every military organization." Over the following days, Maria began preparing for her international assignments by studying British and Australian Apache operations and familiarizing herself with their organizational structures and procedures. She also worked with Dr. Williams to develop standardized assessment tools that could be used to evaluate safety culture across different military organizations. The preparation process gave Maria a new appreciation for the complexity and scope of the task force's mission. They weren't just trying to solve problems within the U.S. Army, they were contributing to a global effort to improve military aviation safety and effectiveness.
Maria's flight from Atlanta to London Heathrow gave her time to reflect on the dramatic changes in her life over the past 2 months. Just 10 weeks earlier, she had been mopping hangar floors and wondering if her career was over. Now she was traveling internationally as a subject matter expert, representing the U.S. Army in discussions with allied militaries about aviation safety and leadership excellence. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same principles and convictions that had nearly ended her career were now being recognized as valuable assets that could help improve military aviation across multiple countries. Her refusal to compromise on safety standards, which had been characterized as rigidity and insubordination, was now viewed as exactly the kind of moral courage that military organizations needed to cultivate. RAF Wattisham, located in Suffolk, about 60 miles northeast of London, was home to the British Army Air Corps Apache operations. The installation was smaller than Fort Campbell, but had the same purposeful atmosphere of professional aviators focused on maintaining readiness for demanding missions. The British AH-64 Apache helicopters were essentially identical to their American counterparts, but Maria immediately noticed differences in maintenance procedures and organizational culture. Squadron leader Sarah Thompson, who served as Maria's primary escort and liaison during the visit, was a veteran Apache pilot with combat experience in Afghanistan and Iraq. Like Maria, she had faced challenges related to safety reporting and organizational resistance to change. But the British system had provided more effective mechanisms for addressing these issues. The key difference, Thompson explained as they toured the maintenance facilities, is that our safety reporting system is completely independent of the operational chain of command. When someone reports a safety concern, it goes directly to the Army Air Corps Safety Center, which has the authority to conduct investigations and mandate corrective actions without unit commander approval. Maria was impressed by the systematic approach the British had developed. How do you prevent retaliation against personnel who make reports? That's where the independence of the system becomes crucial, Thompson replied. The Safety Center maintains complete confidentiality of reporting personnel, and they have the authority to investigate any allegations of retaliation. More importantly, unit commanders are evaluated partially based on how effectively they respond to safety recommendations. They stopped at a workstation where maintenance personnel were conducting a detailed inspection of an Apache's main rotor assembly. Maria noticed that the inspection was being observed by a pilot who was asking questions and taking notes about the procedures being followed. "Is that typical?" Maria asked, having aircrew directly involved in maintenance operations? "Absolutely," Thompson said. "We require all pilots to participate in periodic maintenance observations as part of their continuing education requirements. It helps them understand the technical complexities of the aircraft and improves communication between aircrew and maintenance personnel." The concept aligned perfectly with the recommendations Maria had been developing as part of the task force's work. She made detailed notes about the British implementation and began thinking about how similar procedures could be adapted for U.S. operations. Later that day, Maria participated in a roundtable discussion with British Apache pilots, maintenance personnel, and safety specialists. The conversation revealed that the British had faced many of the same cultural challenges that plagued American units, but they had implemented systematic changes that had significantly improved their safety performance. 5 years ago, we were dealing with exactly the same problems you've described in your report, said Chief Technician David Price, a senior maintenance supervisor with over 20 years of experience. Maintenance shortcuts were becoming normalized, safety concerns were being dismissed, and personnel who raised issues were being marginalized. "What changed?" Maria asked. "Leadership commitment at the highest levels," Price replied without hesitation. "When our accident rates started climbing, the Chief of the General Staff personally intervened and mandated a complete review of our safety culture. More importantly, he made it clear that commanders would be held accountable for safety performance, not just operational metrics."
The discussion continued for several hours, with Maria learning about specific implementation strategies and organizational changes that had proven effective. She was particularly interested in their approach to training and professional development, which emphasized technical competence and ethical decision-making equally. That evening, Thompson invited Maria to join her and several other officers for dinner at a local pub. The informal setting allowed for more candid conversations about the challenges facing military aviators in all countries. The fundamental problem, observed Major William Foster, a senior Apache pilot with extensive combat experience, is that military organizations are inherently conservative and resistant to change. Safety improvements often require admitting that previous practices were inadequate, which can be politically uncomfortable for senior leaders. Maria nodded in agreement. That's exactly what I encountered at Fort Campbell. The safety violations I reported were obvious and well documented, but addressing them would have required acknowledging that the unit's leadership had been tolerating unacceptable practices. The question is how to create incentives for leaders to embrace change rather than resist it, Thompson added. We found that transparency and accountability are crucial. When safety performance becomes a visible and important component of leadership evaluation, behavior changes quickly. The conversation gave Maria new insights into the political and organizational dynamics that influence safety culture in military aviation. She began to understand that the technical and procedural changes the task force was developing would only be effective if they were accompanied by broader cultural and leadership reforms. On her final day at RAF Wattisham, Maria was invited to fly as an observer in a British Apache during a training exercise. The opportunity to return to the cockpit of an Apache, even as a passenger, was emotionally overwhelming. As the aircraft lifted off and climbed to altitude, Maria felt the familiar sensation of being part of a precision machine designed for the most demanding missions. The British crew conducted their training exercise with the same professionalism and attention to detail that Maria associated with the best American Apache units. But she also noticed subtle differences in procedures and communication protocols that reflected their emphasis on safety culture and continuous improvement. Your insights have been invaluable during this visit, Squadron Leader Thompson said over the aircraft's intercom system. We're implementing several of your recommendations about maintenance communication protocols in our own units. As they returned to base, Maria realized that the exchange had been beneficial in both directions. While she had learned about British approaches to safety reporting and leadership accountability, she had also contributed ideas and perspectives that would help improve their operations. During the post-flight debrief, Maria participated in the exact kind of structured discussion between aircrew and maintenance personnel that the British had described as crucial to their safety improvements. The pilot and co-pilot systematically reviewed every aspect of the flight, noting minor discrepancies and discussing potential maintenance implications with the ground crew. This is exactly what we need to implement in American units, Maria told Thompson as they observed the process. The communication between aircrew and maintenance personnel is far more comprehensive than what I typically see at home. Thompson nodded in agreement. It took time to develop this culture, but the results have been dramatic. Our maintenance-related incidents have decreased by 60% since we implemented these procedures 3 years ago. The statistics were compelling, and Maria spent her remaining time at Wattisham documenting the specific elements of the British approach that could be adapted for American operations. She interviewed maintenance supervisors, safety officers, and line pilots, gathering detailed information about implementation challenges and lessons learned. One conversation that particularly impressed her was with Chief Technician Margaret O'Brien, a senior maintenance supervisor who had been instrumental in developing the British safety reporting system. O'Brien had faced similar challenges to what Maria had experienced at Fort Campbell, including resistance from unit leadership and concerns about retaliation. The key was getting senior leadership to understand that safety reporting isn't about finding fault, it's about continuous improvement. Once commanders realized that units with robust safety reporting actually performed better operationally, the resistance diminished significantly. O'Brien went on to describe how the British had implemented anonymous reporting systems that protected personnel from retaliation while still allowing for thorough investigation and corrective action. The system had evolved over several years with constant refinement based on user feedback and operational experience. We also discovered that recognition was crucial, O'Brien continued. Personnel who identified safety issues weren't just protected from retaliation, they were actively recognized for their contributions to unit safety and mission effectiveness. Maria took extensive notes about the recognition programs, seeing immediate applications for American units. The idea of publicly celebrating personnel who identified and reported safety concerns was a powerful cultural statement that would help normalize and encourage such behavior. Her final evening in Britain was spent at a farewell dinner with the Apache squadron personnel who had hosted her visit. The informal setting allowed for candid conversations about the challenges facing military aviators in both countries, and Maria was struck by the similarities in their experiences and concerns. The fundamental issue, observed Major Catherine Walsh, a senior Apache pilot with extensive combat experience, is that military organizations often struggle to balance operational demands with safety requirements. The pressure to maintain high operational tempo can create incentives to cut corners or ignore potential problems. "That's exactly what happened at my unit," Maria replied.
The maintenance supervisor was under tremendous pressure to keep aircraft available for training missions, and safety procedures were gradually compromised in favor of schedule adherence. Squadron Leader Thompson, who had become both a professional colleague and a friend during Maria's visit, offered her final thoughts on the week's exchanges. "What you've accomplished, Maria, goes far beyond just reporting safety violations. You've helped demonstrate that individual moral courage can create systematic organizational change." The comment resonated deeply with Maria, who had often wondered whether her personal sacrifice had been worthwhile. Seeing the British success in addressing similar problems gave her confidence that the American task force could achieve comparable results. The flight back to Alabama gave Maria time to process everything she had learned during her week in Britain. She had filled 2 notebooks with observations and recommendations, but more importantly, she had gained a new understanding of the global scope of the challenges facing military aviation and the potential for international collaboration to address them. Her experience also reinforced her conviction that the work of the Aviation Safety and Leadership Excellence Task Force was both necessary and achievable. The British had proven that military organizations could change their culture and improve their safety performance when leadership made it a priority and provided the necessary resources and authority. As the aircraft descended toward Atlanta, Maria found herself thinking about the soldiers and aviators who would benefit from the changes the task force was developing. Every improved procedure, every enhanced training protocol, every cultural reform that encouraged safety reporting had the potential to prevent accidents and save lives. She thought about Chief Warrant Officer Michael Torres, whose death in an Apache accident had helped motivate her decision to report safety violations at Fort Campbell. Torres would never know that his sacrifice had contributed to broader reforms that might prevent similar tragedies, but Maria was determined to ensure that his memory continued to inspire the changes that were needed. The British experience had shown her that transformation was possible, but it required sustained commitment from leadership at all levels. The technical solutions were relatively straightforward: improved procedures, better communication protocols, enhanced training programs. The real challenge lay in changing organizational culture and creating incentives that supported safety reporting and continuous improvement. Upon her return to Fort Rucker, Maria immediately began preparing a comprehensive report on her British exchange, highlighting specific recommendations that could be implemented in American units. The report would become a crucial component of the task force's final recommendations, providing concrete examples of successful safety culture transformation. But beyond the formal report, Maria's experience in Britain had given her something even more valuable: confidence that the changes they were working to implement could succeed. She had seen firsthand that military organizations could evolve and improve when the right leadership and systems were in place. The work was far from over. Maria's international exchanges would continue with visits to Australia and Germany, and the task force still had months of analysis and policy development ahead of them.
But for the first time since her ordeal at Fort Campbell had begun, Maria felt confident that she was exactly where she needed to be, doing work that would have lasting impact on the aviation community she loved. As she settled back into her routine at Fort Rucker, Maria carried with her the knowledge that change was not only possible, but inevitable. The question was no longer whether American military aviation culture would evolve, but how quickly and effectively the transformation could be implemented. Her role in that process had expanded far beyond anything she could have imagined when her Apache pilot wings first fell to that hangar floor. But she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.
18 months after her Apache pilot wings had fallen from her torn pocket onto the oil-stained hangar floor at Fort Campbell, Staff Sergeant Maria Santos stood at a podium in the Pentagon's most prestigious briefing room. The audience included the Secretary of the Army, the Chief of Staff, and senior leaders from across the military aviation community. She was preparing to present the final recommendations of the Aviation Safety and Leadership Excellence Task Force, recommendations that would fundamentally change how the Army approached aviation safety and leadership development. The transformation in Maria's circumstances was remarkable, but the changes she had helped bring about were even more significant. The task force's 18-month effort had resulted in comprehensive reforms that were already being implemented across Army aviation units worldwide. More importantly, the cultural shift towards supporting safety advocates and holding leaders accountable for safety performance was beginning to take root throughout the organization. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maria began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. 18 months ago, I was assigned to maintenance duties after reporting safety violations that I believed posed a threat to aircrew and mission safety. Today, I stand before you representing hundreds of soldiers who have found the courage to speak up about safety concerns because they know they will be supported rather than punished. The briefing room was completely silent as Maria outlined the task force's findings and recommendations. The data was compelling. Accident rates had already begun to decline in units that had implemented the new safety reporting procedures, and surveys showed significantly improved confidence in leadership among enlisted personnel and junior officers. The key to our success has been recognizing that safety culture cannot be mandated from above. It must be cultivated through consistent leadership example and systematic support for personnel who identify and report problems, Maria continued. Every soldier, regardless of rank or position, must understand that they have not just the right, but the responsibility to speak up when they observe practices that compromise safety or mission effectiveness. Among the most significant recommendations was the establishment of independent safety boards at each major installation, with the authority to investigate concerns and mandate corrective actions without interference from operational commanders. The boards would be staffed by experienced aviators and maintenance personnel from multiple units, ensuring that local politics and personal relationships couldn't compromise their objectivity. The task force had also developed new leadership evaluation criteria that included specific metrics for safety culture and subordinate development. Commanders would be assessed not just on operational results, but on their ability to create environments where safety concerns were welcomed and addressed promptly. Perhaps most importantly, Maria explained, we are implementing systematic protection and career enhancement opportunities for personnel who demonstrate moral courage in reporting safety concerns. Instead of facing retaliation, these individuals will be recognized as valuable assets who contribute to the overall effectiveness of the aviation community. The presentation lasted 45 minutes and covered every aspect of the task force's work, from technical recommendations about maintenance procedures to broad cultural changes designed to encourage transparency and accountability. When Maria finished,
The room erupted in sustained applause, an unusual demonstration of approval in the typically restrained Pentagon environment. Secretary of the Army Christine Morrison stood to address the audience directly. Staff Sergeant Santos, your presentation today represents the culmination of one of the most important initiatives undertaken by the Department of the Army in recent years. Your personal experience and professional expertise have been instrumental in developing solutions that will save lives and improve mission effectiveness for years to come. Morrison paused, consulting her notes before continuing. I'm pleased to announce that the Aviation Safety and Leadership Excellence Initiative will be expanded to all Army aviation platforms, not just Apache operations. Furthermore, Staff Sergeant Santos has been selected for promotion to Sergeant First Class and assignment as the Army's first Senior Safety Advocate, a new position that will provide oversight and guidance for safety culture development across all aviation units. The announcement was unexpected, and Maria felt tears welling in her eyes as she realized the full implications. Not only had her principled stand been vindicated, but it had resulted in systematic changes that would benefit thousands of current and future soldiers. The position of Senior Safety Advocate would allow her to continue the work she had started, but with greater authority and broader scope. Chief of Staff General Rebecca Davis added her own comments to the proceedings. The changes we're implementing today are a direct result of one soldier's courage to do the right thing, even when it came at significant personal cost. Staff Sergeant Santos could have remained silent about the safety violations she observed, but her commitment to her fellow soldiers compelled her to speak up despite the professional risks. As the briefing concluded and the audience began to disperse, Maria was approached by numerous senior officers who offered congratulations and expressed support for the continued implementation of the task force's recommendations. But the moment that meant the most to her came from Chief Warrant Officer 5 David Rodriguez, her mentor and colleague from the task force. Santos, Rodriguez said with uncharacteristic emotion in his voice, I want you to know that what you've accomplished here goes far beyond policy changes and organizational reforms. You've helped restore faith in the system for countless soldiers who had lost confidence that the Army would support them for doing the right thing. Maria felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had achieved together. Chief, none of this would have been possible without your support and the work of the entire task force team. This was never about one person. It was about changing a culture that had lost its way. That's exactly right, Rodriguez replied. But culture change requires individuals with the courage to take the first step, even when they can't see where the path leads. You took that step when you reported those safety violations at Fort Campbell, and everything that followed was built on that foundation of moral courage. As Maria prepared to leave the Pentagon that evening, she received a text message from Chief Warrant Officer Jake Mitchell, her old colleague from Fort Campbell. The message was brief, but meaningful. Saw the news about your promotion and new assignment. Ghost 6 rides again. Proud to have served with you. The reference to her old call sign brought back memories of her combat missions in Afghanistan, when she had been known as one of the most capable and reliable Apache pilots in theater. In many ways, she felt like she was returning to that version of herself, confident, competent, and committed to mission accomplishment at the highest levels. But her experience over the past 18 months had also changed her in fundamental ways. She understood now that individual excellence, while important, was not sufficient if the systems and culture surrounding that excellence were flawed. True leadership required not just personal competence, but the courage to challenge and improve the organizational structures that support mission accomplishment. 3 weeks later, Sergeant First Class Maria Santos reported to her new assignment at Fort Rucker, where she would oversee the implementation of the Aviation Safety and Leadership Excellence Initiative across all Army aviation platforms. Her office was located in the same building where she had worked as part of the task force, but her responsibilities now extended far beyond Apache operations. On her first day in the new position, Maria received a package from an unexpected source. Inside was a handwritten letter from the widow of Chief Warrant Officer Michael Torres, the Apache pilot whose death had motivated Maria's initial decision to report safety violations at Fort Campbell. Dear Sergeant First Class Santos, I wanted you to know that I've been following the news about the safety reforms you've helped implement. While nothing can bring back my husband, I find comfort in knowing that his death contributed to changes that will help protect other families from experiencing our loss. The letter continued for several pages describing how Torres's children were growing up with pride in their father's service and how his widow had found meaning in supporting other military families facing similar challenges. But the closing paragraph was what moved Maria to tears. Michael always said that the most important thing about being a soldier was taking care of your fellow soldiers. I believe that's exactly what you've done through your work on aviation safety. Thank you for having the courage to speak up and for turning a personal tragedy into positive change that will honor my husband's memory. That evening, Maria walked through the hangar complex at Fort Rucker, observing the maintenance operations and flight preparations that were happening around the clock. Apache helicopters sat in various stages of maintenance and preparation, tended by crews who now operated under improved procedures and enhanced safety protocols that had resulted from her work with the task force. She paused beside one of the Apache helicopters and ran her hand along its armored fuselage, feeling the familiar texture of the composite materials and remembering the thousands of hours she had spent in similar aircraft. The helicopter was a magnificent machine, but it was also dangerous and unforgiving, demanding the highest levels of competence and attention from everyone who worked with it. As she stood there, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her from a hangar floor at Fort Campbell to a position of responsibility and influence at the highest levels of Army aviation. The Apache pilot wings on her uniform caught the light from the hangar's fluorescent fixtures, the same wings that had fallen from her torn pocket 18 months earlier, symbolizing what had seemed like the end of her career. But that moment on the hangar floor had actually been a beginning rather than an ending. Her willingness to report safety violations, despite the personal cost, had ultimately led to systematic changes that would benefit thousands of soldiers and potentially save countless lives. The wings that had once represented her individual achievement now symbolized her commitment to the broader aviation community and her responsibility to ensure that moral courage was supported and rewarded rather than punished. 6 months later, Maria received notification that she had been selected for the Army's Command Sergeant Major Academy, the institution that prepared senior enlisted leaders for the most demanding assignments in the service. Her selection was accompanied by a note from the Sergeant Major of the Army, who wrote that her experience and leadership in aviation safety reform made her an ideal candidate for senior leadership positions. As she prepared for this next phase of her career, Maria often thought about the young soldiers and aviators who would benefit from the cultural changes that had been implemented across Army aviation. They would enter a system that valued moral courage and supported personnel who identified and reported problems. They would serve under leaders who were held accountable for safety performance and subordinate development, not just operational metrics. Most importantly, they would understand that speaking up about safety concerns was not just acceptable, but essential to mission accomplishment and the welfare of their fellow soldiers. The culture of silence and retaliation that had nearly ended Maria's career was being systematically dismantled and replaced with transparency, accountability, and genuine commitment to excellence. The transformation wasn't complete. Cultural change in large organizations takes time and sustained effort. But the foundation had been laid, and Maria was confident that the improvements would continue long after she had moved on to other assignments and challenges. On her final day as senior safety advocate, Maria returned to the hangar where her journey had begun. But instead of mopping floors, she was there to present awards to maintenance personnel who had demonstrated exceptional commitment to safety and mission readiness. Among the recipients was a young specialist who had reported a potentially dangerous maintenance shortcut, leading to corrective actions that prevented a possible accident. "Specialist Johnson," Maria said as she pinned the Army Achievement Medal on the young soldier's uniform, "your willingness to speak up about safety concerns exemplifies the kind of moral courage that makes our aviation community strong. Thank you for putting the welfare of your fellow soldiers ahead of personal convenience." As the ceremony concluded, Maria looked around the hangar filled with Apache helicopters and the soldiers who maintained and operated them. She thought about Chief Warrant Officer Torres and all the other aviators who had been lost in preventable accidents. She thought about the soldiers who had been punished for trying to improve safety and the leaders who had failed to support them. But mostly, she thought about the future, about young soldiers who would enter a system that valued their insights and protected their courage, about leaders who would be held accountable for creating positive safety cultures, and about the lives that would be saved through the systematic reforms that had grown from one woman's refusal to remain silent in the face of dangerous shortcuts. Maria's Apache pilot wings gleamed on her dress uniform as she prepared to leave the hangar for the last time in her current assignment. Those wings had traveled a long journey, from a moment of apparent defeat on a dirty hangar floor to a symbol of transformation and moral courage that would inspire future generations of military aviators. The story that had begun with a mop and a torn pocket had become something far greater, a testament to the power of individual courage to create systematic change, and a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought not against foreign enemies, but against the complacency and compromise that can undermine the very organizations we serve. As she walked towards her car, she smiled at the irony of her situation. She had started this journey trying to protect the safety and effectiveness of Apache operations. In the end, she had helped transform the entire culture of Army aviation, creating systems and standards that would protect soldiers and enhance mission capability for decades to come. The wings in her pocket had indeed fallen, but from that fall had risen something much more significant than any individual career could ever be.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.